Hi, everyone. Welcome back to our podcast, How to Write the Future. Tips for writers and anyone who cares about the future. I'm your host, Beth Barany. I am an award-winning science fiction and fantasy author who supports, teaches, and coaches other science fiction and fantasy authors. I also support creative entrepreneurs who would like to build their own businesses. And I'm a filmmaker and, of course, podcaster. All the things, of course. I run this podcast because I am passionate about helping writers and anyone who cares about the future to help us re-envision how we want to be as humanity. And I think stories are the most powerful way to do that. And so I love to interview other authors and thinkers and futurists and people who are thinking outside the box. So today I have one of those people. Welcome, Chad. I am so glad to have you here with us today. Welcome.
I think great to be here.
So wonderful. Everyone, I'm going to read Chad's bio so you can get to know him a little bit. All right, Chad, I love your bio. So here's a little bit about Chad. Chad Grayson has worn many hats: tech support flunky, gas station philosopher, reluctant middle school wrangler, and for one unforgettable night, cheese mold removal specialist. These days, he lives in far Northern California, where he writes hopeful, character-focused sci-fi and fantasy that will break your heart and duct tape it back together. He can usually be found painting tiny fantasy heroes and monsters, wandering the woods in deep narrative contemplation, or yelling at his plot outlines like they've personally betrayed him. They know what they did. His superpowers include procrastination, dyscalculia, and making emotionally devastating story beats sound like a perfectly reasonable life choice. Welcome, Chad. So glad that you are here. Really fun to have you. Welcome again.
Thank you.
I love your bio. It is hilarious and wonderful and touching. So let's dive into our questions. I ask my guests to provide questions ahead of time because I want to talk about what they want to talk about, as long as it's within the framework of our scope. We're going to just dive right in. I often talk about world building and character development on this podcast. And Chad, I really appreciate your questions. So let's just start. In what ways can queer people be seamlessly integrated into futuristic fantasy or secondary world building? And I just have to say, I'm attempting this too in my own work. So yeah, can you talk to us on that?
Well, it's a lot simpler than people try to make it sometimes. Whenever I'm talking about the representation in the groups that are in my books, I always get questions, especially from people in my writing group, about, well, how do you do that naturally? Like, I don't want to make an announcement whenever a character enters the room, like what their sexual orientation is. And I'm like, it's really simple. Hopefully, when you are developing your characters and you're writing your characters, you're giving them little character moments where they talk about their lives or their pasts. So you can just have your darkest assassin talk about her ex-girlfriend or something, or just mention like the priest's husband or the priestess's wife. I'm not asking for everybody to center queer characters in the narratives in world building, which would be nice, actually, as nice as that would be. But just to include us and to show that we exist and in whatever ways are appropriate in your world, whether that is a more marginal existence in some worlds that's appropriate, or if everybody's just accepted, acknowledge that we exist and show that we are present.
I love that. Yeah. I love that because, every character has a past and every character has their preoccupations. So sometimes what I like to do when I'm doing my character sketches and starting to understand who my characters are, and actually you're reminding me I have to do this for one of my characters, is to really get clear what is their preoccupation or interests, and maybe they're going on a date that night. They all come from somewhere. One of my characters has, in my work in progress, he has 2 moms and a dad. And he just mentions it in his enthusiastic way as he's talking about his family, because he's a chatterbox and he's a young man. And then I have my protagonist, my point of view character, think about she had just met one of the mothers. And so she's like, oh yeah, I could see the resemblance, and also in the personality. So we all do that. We all talk about our families and we all see resemblances between family members, for example, could be traits, could be physical traits. And so that's wonderful. And it's even something that you can include when you're planning your story. You can be thinking about the wider culture and the relationships that person has.
Some people think you have to have the character walk in announcing their orientation, and that is not what you need to do. That is actually kind of off-putting to people that way. There are some, like you just mentioned, there are some science fiction fantasy writers who do this really well. I really appreciated how in the Expanse series that they had the main character talk about his moms and dads, and it was a group marriage situation that he was raised by. Even somebody like Brandon Sanderson has, in the Stormlight Archive, I know he's gotten more in depth with it in his most recent books, but even along the way, he had one side character who dates men. It was no big deal to everybody. It's really easy to work it in seamlessly. It doesn't have to become a major plot point, although it's nice if it does. But it is so much easier than you think it is. And you don't have to have the burden of thinking you have to represent everything all the time. But let's just acknowledge that those people like us exist and that are part of your world.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's really important to reflect the diversity of reality. A lot of art in the past has basically disappeared groups of people, genders, races. I mean, women got completely disappeared from so many narratives when they were, in fact, instrumental. So that's one of my big focuses in my own work. So I really appreciate that you brought that up and that we talk about it and we think about it. If you've read a lot of stories that do not include diversity, then it could be easy to forget to actually reflect diversity in our own work. Just because previous writers have forgotten or made the choice, or often it's ignorance, it doesn't mean that we can't bring more inclusivity into our work.
Yeah, all these groups have been here all these years. We've always been here. We've always been part of the story of life. And there have been people writing about all these different groups over time. They didn't get a lot of attention for it. There are some authors who are writing about queer people in the 80s and 90s, but we've always been here. And it's nice that we're into a time now where it is seen as more natural to include us.
Absolutely. And it is so important to see ourselves represented in story. I don't know about you, but I've often wondered, how come I don't see anyone like me, who might have my disability, with like what I have with my hands, or even someone who has my kind of personality or my interest, or my psychology even.
As a queer kid growing up in the Midwest, I didn't see happy queer people in stories until the early 2000s. And that kept me in the closet until I was 46 years old.
Yeah.
I mean, not that it was the only thing. It was a big complicated situation, but if I had seen some examples of queer people who were not tragic or tortured or dying of some disease, that would have really changed my life. When Rick Riordan started writing his stories about Nico and making it clear that he was queer and with his relationship, I saw that first cover of that book and I seriously wept for 30 minutes because I was like, if this book had existed when I was 13, my entire life might have been different. So seeing yourself in story is very important, especially for younger people, but for everybody.
Yeah. And what is the title of that book?
It's The Sun and the Star.
Okay.
By Rick Riordan and Mark Oshiro. And it's part of the Percy Jackson series.
Wow. I love the Percy Jackson series. Yeah. I write YA and I'm a big reader of YA as well.
But yeah, seriously, I looked at that and I had to pull it over the car because it was so powerful. This is a kid's book and it's got two boys holding hands on the cover and it just really moved me. The book was actually good when I read it. So that was good.
That's good too. Yeah. So good.
Sure.
I love your next question. So there you are. You're a writer. It sounds like you have writing really centered in your life and you've prioritized it. So tell us some tips for being productive, especially for neurodivergent people.
Okay, so I wrote my entire life on the side. It was what I wanted to do with my life, but I never bought into the idea that I could actually do it full time. I became a teacher. I had a life. I had kids. I raised kids. I wrote a lot, but I didn't finish anything. Finally, in 2019, I had a big, I don't know if you call it life crisis, or I ended my marriage. I came out of the closet and I decided, since I have the opportunity now, I'm going to make writing the central part of my life. So July 1st, 2019 was when I made that decision and I've done it ever since. I have the luxury of having sort of an income that doesn't depend on my writing or at having a day job. So I acknowledge that right away. But I am also neurodivergent. I have ADHD. I'm somewhere on the autism spectrum, and I have bipolar disorder. So like that created a bunch of challenges for actually getting the work done. And what I started out doing is you just have to build the habit in whatever way works for you. And the way you do that is you start out with a really easy, manageable goal at first. Like say, I'm going to write for 10 minutes, or I'm going to write 300 words, and hit that. Build up a history of success for yourself, and that will kind of launch you into bigger leaps of productivity. I started out with 1,000 words a day, which for me is not that hard because I tend to write fast. But like I know some people that would be a challenge. So I'd say like 200, 300 words a day is fine. That's a book in a year if you can do that. And I have built up over the course of time through just repetition of the habits that I'm now doing. I write 2 hours a day, and I usually write 2,500 words a day. I do that 3 or 4 times a week. I don't do it every single day because that would wear me out. And an important thing you do is you got to figure out the way that works for you. You've also got to schedule the time, really. My joke that you only have to schedule the things you actually want to happen. And what I started doing was putting my writing time on a Google Calendar and sending it to the people in my life, saying that this is my writing time. This is what I'm doing during this time. Do not bother me unless somebody important is on fire. I did that, and it took a little bit of time for them to kind of understand that. And but they did. And the flip side of that was I felt like I was creating a bargain with them that I would actually be writing during that time, so that I wouldn't get to that time and be like, okay, I feel like playing video games or something else. So you got to create that contract with yourself and the people you love that if they give you the time, you got to use it properly. And that kind of builds up a little bit of social pressure, and that helps. And you got to find the method that works for you. For me, I'm kind of 60% planner, 40% discovery writer. I have an outline that does kind of loosey-goosey and just major plot points. And then I kind of discovery write my way between those plot points. And that works really well for me. Since 2019, I've actually written, I think I'm on book 13 right now. And I've published 10 of them since 2021. So like I figured out what made me work. Also, I worked on things that I loved. I didn't write to the market. I didn't create a bullet list of here's how I'm going to break in and become a bestseller right away by following these trends. I wrote the books of my heart, and that made me very motivated to do that. And I think if you give yourself permission to do that, you will be much more motivated to hit the goal, and you'll produce a lot more. And you'll create a body of work you're really proud of, which is really important.
I love all your tips, setting a reasonable goal, an attainable goal, scheduling, bringing in your loved ones to help you with accountability and social pressure, and working on what you love. And that's beautiful because now you're pulled into it because your heart is calling to you. I don't know about you, but my characters talk to me and they want their stories told. And the only way to do that is to sit down and do it. They don't talk to me like all the time, but they're almost like, sit down and get to work so my story can come out. That's where they talk. Yeah.
Also, there's this thing about that's for everybody, but especially for neurodivergent people, it's activation energy. The hardest part of a task is starting the task. So when it comes time to work, you sit down and have a little ritual. Either you light a candle or you put on special music. For me, I sit down, and the first part of my writing time is I do a 10-minute meditation, usually a guided meditation from YouTube about creativity or inspiration, and that gets me into the zone. And that lets me get going a lot quicker than if I was just trying to sit down and do it cold. I also look at what I wrote the day before and get into it that way. Just have rituals for yourself that get that activation going, and you'll find you can accomplish a lot more than if you just sit down and try to make yourself go.
I love that so much. I teach that. So funny. One person recently said, "Oh, are you ADHD?" And I'm like, I don't know, but I do all of this. I do rituals. I journal before I write. I have music. I have a whole starting ritual. And I encourage writers to have what I call a starting ritual, the way that you get yourself into it. And I also liken it to, I did triathlons. I did 4 sprint triathlons years ago. And you actually have to train what's called train the transitions. You train, what do you do before you start the race? What do you do when you transition from one thing to another? All of that is something that you can train. Humans, we're all habit-based. And if you can help yourself have that habit, yeah, you can get yourself into it. And I just love to hear what you're doing and doing meditation before writing. That is so, so wonderful. I wish more people did that.
You can also make your work a very pleasant environment if you have that opportunity. There's a lot of things to do. Just make it as pleasant as possible. Remove as many barriers as possible, whatever they are. And that's going to be the individual per person. So there's not like one like big tip on that, but just remove the barriers. Make it as easy for yourself as possible. So let your brain unleash.
Yes, let your brain unleash. That is so wonderful. I love that. And that kind of segues us into the next question, which you've been talking about, but maybe there's some more you want to say, which is how can you develop and protect your creativity when you have a busy life?
I gave a presentation on this a while back, and the biggest tip I have is not to get too sciencey here, but there's part of the brain called the default mode network, which is what your brain is doing when you're not really doing anything mental. So like when you are washing the dishes or in the shower, this is where shower thoughts come from. Like your brain just kind of wanders. Protect your time. Don't necessarily be listening to something all the time or like be busy all the time. Protect the time that you have that your brain can just work. Like you're working a problem in the background. And just maybe take just 10 minutes a day. Just take a short walk. Don't listen to a podcast. Sorry. Don't listen to a podcast or audiobook or even music. Just like give your brain time to wander. And that's going to like really like stir up that stuff in your default mode network and bring creative solutions to problems and even creative ideas. We get a lot of ideas when we're bored. Like for an ADHD person, boredom feels toxic sometimes, but it can also be a really great state in which your brain is creating things. So don't try to be entertained all the time. Let yourself get bored. The other thing is, as well as like the other tips, just like, protect your time. Always realize you're thinking about things in the background. Be feeding yourself good art and also art that you might not like as much so you can like pick it apart. Constantly be feeding yourself things that inspire you. Take yourself on artist dates. That's one of the Julia Camerons from The Artist's Way. Be going out and having new experiences. Yeah, just things like that. Like just treat your creativity as important. The other thing I really harp on is everybody is creative. There's not such a thing as a creative person and a non-creative person. You might have a job you think is not very creative, but trust me, you're solving problems. You're coming up with new ways of doing things. You are a creative person, even if it doesn't seem like you're not producing art or writing or craft projects or something else. Everybody is creative because we're humans. And just keeping in touch with that part of our humanity creates empathy and can keep us kind of sane in a world that seems like it's going a little nuts sometimes.
Absolutely. I feel like you and I could stand side by side and would be nodding at each other. Like I teach the exact same things. I love it so much, especially, science has shown, and please do get sciencey. I am a science fiction writer. Nerdy is great around here. I love what you were saying, how that part of our brain that needs to wander and meander. And it's a good reminder for me too, because I am a high level learner on the Clifton Strengths. I'm #1 learner. So I always want to be learning things. I'm always listening to a YouTube video or to French radio. I speak French, or talking to a friend through asynchronous audio communication. But the other day, I was just so full of doing so much. I stopped. I didn't listen to anything. I took a walk. It was great. So it was just a reminder myself to do more of that. So thank you so much for bringing that up and to feed yourself. Also, I have a whole freebie that maybe I'll call it out for this episode, which is 10 ways to jumpstart your ideas. It's just a laundry list of fun ways, a very short little ebook to encourage folks to do new things. And science is showing, coming back to brain science, that the only way that we're going to have new thoughts and new ideas is if we expose ourselves to new things, new people, new places, new art, new music, new authors, new locations. And that is the only way that we're going to be able to actually come up with new ideas and create new kinds of stories and also come up with new ways of being in the world. So yes, 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 feed yourself art. And I love, take yourself on an artist date. Wonderful, wonderful advice.
We all have like a idea antenna that's kind of out there like pulling things from the universe. And sometimes we just have to learn to listen to that. And that's what the default mode network and doing new things is about sometimes.
Yes. And so it makes sense that with the default mode network and this thing we call boredom is actually an essential part to our human evolution, to our ability to come up with new ideas. I can almost see, like, let's have a boredom campaign. Let's see how bored we can get. What can I do today that's going to create some boredom?
That might be a hard sell, but I can see it would be useful.
It'd be funny. Yeah. I mean, oh yeah, I'm going to go stand in line here or there, whatever. Yeah. So I have one more question for you as we wrap up for today. So, Chad, this is kind of a nice bookend to the first question I asked. How can we as writers properly represent neurodivergent people in our fiction?
The answer is a little bit the same as with queer people, is just show that we exist. It's a little bit more of a challenge to understand what neurodivergence is sometimes for writers and not just make it, oh, this person's quirky, because there are quirky neurodivergent people, but there are also some of us who aren't. And also, it doesn't hurt to actually state that they're neurodivergent, and especially science fictional worlds where this is known about. In my fantasy book, Curse the Onyx Heart, one of the co-lead characters is Teely. He is an elf. He's based on my best friend's D&D character, actually. And my best friend is autistic, so I modeled that character after him. And he's an autistic mage, like, definitely. I don't ever use that word because it's, like, about like, Renaissance-y kind of era. But, like, a reader picked up that he was, like, this, is he autistic? And I was really proud of the fact that, like, I got that right. They love the character, and I thought he was a good bit of representation. This takes a little bit of research sometimes, because if you've met one neurodivergent person, you met one neurodivergent person. We are all different, and it expresses differently. There's a lot of really great resources online on what that feels like. There's a lot of writing from people who experiences these. I am my blog. I write about ADHD and bipolar disorder all the time and how it affects my life. Look for primary sources for people writing about their own lives. Tumblr is full of this. You look at tags on Tumblr and get a first-person perspective, because if you get only third-person perspectives, you're going to miss a lot of nuance, and you might create some harmful stereotypes. But just include us, show that we can function in society. There are high support needs autistics. My granddaughter is one of them. But there are a lot of autistic people who are just fine, just with a little bit of a difference in the way their brain works. So show that we can be productive members of society, show us using our gifts in interesting ways, and show that we can have full lives. And we're not tortured by our either genius or math.
I really love what you're saying and I want to underscore doing primary research. Like when I realized I wanted to start including those kind of characters in my work, I went and talked to a friend who is neurodivergent and was diagnosed kind of late, which often happens with women. And I talked to her, and I also talked, how do we go about researching this kind of thing? And so I love that you keep a blog. Thank you for sharing about your life. And there are a lot of people who talk about their life, and we have access to that these days, which is one of the wonderful things about the internet. I don't know about you, but not everybody knows how to research very well these days. I come from a library background, so I realize I have some skill sets that I have been cultivating for a really long time. But what do you recommend in terms of search terms to make sure we can find those first-person accounts?
You can put first-person account or blogs by blogs by ADHD people, blogs by autistic people. Look at the tags on Tumblr. Tumblr's got a lot of weird stuff on it. But Tumblr's also really great for people who are writing about their lives and their own experiences. Just look at the tags like ADHD or autism or ADHD. Those are some terms that are popular there. Also, there are first-person resources like How to ADHD is by Jessica McCabe. She is a YouTuber. She also wrote a book called How to ADHD, and it was an amazing first-person primary source of how to deal with having ADHD through diagnosis, through how to integrate what you learn into your life. So I really recommend her. There are a lot of podcasts of ADHD people that are from ADHD people. So just look up ADHD podcasts. I get most of my podcasts from Spotify, and they have like a whole channel of like neurodivergent resources there. So look for like things that are people's personal experiences. That's going to be most helpful. You also can do the things like look at the Wikipedia entry for whatever you're looking at. That's a good place to start to know the bare basics of what this syndrome or brain difference is like and how it works on a scientific level. But realize also, like, you get one primary source. It's better to have two or three at least, because the expression of these things is different for each person. So if you can kind of triangulate, you can get to something really realistic that'll resonate with a lot of people. If you just go with one person, that'll be their experience and they'll probably resonate with people. But if you want to go more broader, get like 2 or 3 at least references on something to really like I said, triangulate what that looks like in a broad group of people.
I love that. I love your use of triangulate. That's so wonderful. There is one more question that I like to spring on folks as we wrap up. It won't be too out of the blue. My question for you is, for those who want to think about how to write the future and how we might use our fiction to reshape how we want to be in the world, do you have any tips for those writers who are thinking along those lines?
I think it's really important to think about things that are possible and where we might go in a hopeful way. I do not like grimdark fiction. I don't have anything against people who write it, but it is not my thing. I tend to want to imagine us solving our problems. And I think that's more useful on a society level than just wallowing in like how bad things can get, which is it has its own use because we do need those stories of warning. But just when you're especially writing futuristic things, think about just how we look at the problems we have today. There are societal, like near societal collapses that are coming in with climate change, with the problematic society, with income inequality. We have an opportunity to look at how those problems can be solved. And I think we have a responsibility to do that, to show people the way. And in fantasy worlds, we don't have to create fantasy worlds that mimic all the bigotries of the past. We can create fantasy worlds that are more inclusive for different ethnic groups and queer people and for neurodivergent people and for all kinds of different minorities. We have the opportunity to recreate what has been. And we don't have to just like, oh, well, it was Middle Ages, so of course they're going to be misogynist. We don't have to do that. We can create different worlds. And I would like to see a lot more people do that because I think it's more useful and more hopeful and also more interesting to include people.
Absolutely. I love that so much. Well, Chad, thank you so much for coming on How to Write the Future today and supporting the creation of hopeful, optimistic possibilities for us as humans on this planet. So thank you so much.
Welcome. It was your pleasure.
All right, everyone. That's it for this week. Write long and prosper. And that's a wrap.